Okay, so today we will discuss ISA primarily from a risk and perspective, right? So we'll discuss what this risk is, and then there is a old style of designing ISA that's called CISC. Okay. For today's lecture, I have used a book by Hennessy and Peterson. Actually, it's called Peterson and Hennessy, and they have come out with a book on RISC-V architecture. So I'm using that. Okay, so we'll study only two topics, risk versus CISC and ways of designing data path and control. And of course, we will also look at the performance, which I have also included in this presentation. So maybe you can add one more point as performance. Okay, all right. Okay. So first thing first is that what is complex instruction? What is a simple instruction? Okay, complex instruction, and that we are talking about assembly language instruction. Okay, the one that is called complex instruction is the instruction that does lot of work. Yeah, it means that many operations it does, right? So for example, you may have W linked list. You can compute FFT. FFT stands for Fourier transform, fast Fourier transform. In electrical engineering, DSP possibly you would have studied, or maybe string copy, or some image rendering function, or something like that, right? So complex instruction does lot of activity. Okay, wherein simple instruction does very small amount of work. Okay, but in order to do the complex activity or work corresponding to a complex instruction or corresponding to, say, for example, FFT or a string copy, it can do a lot of simple operations, right, in order to achieve that. So the simple instruction set has to be complete in the sense that whatever instruction it has, that they should be able to perform most of the functions, almost everything that a complex instruction does. Okay. So simple instructions are very simple in nature. I mean, these are add, multiply, divide, and so on, right? And data types are also simple. Their format is also simple. Okay, when we see format, the instruction is generally of 32-bit size or 64-bit size, but instruction size can also vary within an ISA. Okay, it could be either 32, and some could be of 48, some could be of 64. Then within instruction also you can have multiple, the format of instruction can also vary depending on the instruction, right? So in case of complex instructions set, yeah, there is a complexity with respect to not only amount of competition they do, but also in terms of the format, which is not very uniform. Also, number of instructions that it can support, right, could be very large. Where in RISC or simple instruction set, its instructions are very simple. Okay, like add, XOR, or multiply. So basically, we have said there are complex instruction and simple instruction. Complex instructions are part of CISC. Generally, this is part of RISC. Okay, but CISC may also contain some simple instructions. Some, but it surely has very many complex instructions. So it may be complex plus simple. Could be simple. RISC always have simple instructions. That means that each instruction does very little, but you can achieve functionality of complex function with the help of multiple of these simple functions, right? So these are two design philosophies. Okay, so let's see advantage, disadvantage of each, and then actually we'll look at simple instruction set. Okay, now complex instruction will have denser encoding. It means that suppose we are doing matrix multiplication or FFT, then you need only few instructions, right, in the program. because each instruction is using a lot of activities. Okay, so it could be, it means that overall code size is small. Number of instructions that are needed to do the job are much less compared to simple instructions, right? So, but this was useful right in the beginning when people were doing programming in assembly, and secondly when memory was very limited. I mean, when I started coding, the coding was done not really execution speed in mind, but also memory in mind, right? So memory was very limited, and I had to make sure that my program fits into the memory. Okay, if that is a constraint posed to programmer, then they will try to do maximum with one instruction. So that's the reason all these complex instruction set started. So there are some advantages. Even now, for example, Intel has primarily complex instructions. However, again, now people are moving towards complex instruction when we have to design very special purpose computer for particular application. Okay, so now trends keep changing. However, we look at both positive and negative side of each. Okay, all right. So disadvantage is that each instruction will do a larger chunk of work, and so compiler has very less opportunity to optimize for many programs. Okay, because so it was seen. Actually, there is a lecture by Patterson on YouTube. The one, Patterson and Hennessy were the two great professors of. Patterson was in Berkeley, and then Hennessy was in Stanford. I think both are still there. And they were the ones who proposed this RISC architecture around mid-80s. And they had a lot of difficulty in convincing people that don't design complex instructions, design simple instructions, so you have more efficiency in silicon. You can use silicon properly. Okay, and then they had to in order to convince the world, they had to come out with a lot of models. Okay, we'll discuss some of these later. Okay, so more complex hardware, it means that instruction that is to be executed will have more complex hardware. Okay, now if you're designing a general purpose computer, then all this is going to cause problems, right? Because why unnecessarily create complexity in hardware? Now, if you're designing only for FFT or only for AI applications, then complex or some instructions which are complex in nature is absolutely fine. Okay. So now let's come to RISC. RISC is reduced instruction set computer. Okay. So instructions are not only simple, but the number of instructions are also less. Instruction also have very uniform kind of format. Number of addressing modes are less. Okay, so overall complexity that we can say is less. So compiler can play with then these instructions, right? Because it can do a lot of optimization. When you do compiler codes, possibly you keep this thing in mind, whether instructions are simple or complex. Okay, and simple instruction in general have fixed length. It means that, I mean, we have seen case of instruction, there is opcode, and then certain number of operands, right? So if we keep changing this, opcode size, for example, we initially, let's assume it's 8 bits, and then change it to 10 bits, then make it 9 bits. Okay, so there will be difficulty in decoding this part, right? And there will be difficulty in creating control system, right? And that will create complexity. Similarly here, how you are going to address operands? Okay, how do you are going to, for example, this may represent memory. This is address of memory. So you will have to get something from particular memory location. This is simple. Now you say that I am not getting data from memory to a register, but I am getting the data here actually represent another memory location. Okay, now I will give this to a program counter. And the program counter will then fetch the final thing that you want. So this makes life unnecessarily difficult and may take, a lot of computation. All right. So, so one great advantage of RISC is that simpler hardware, and and the compiler has more opportunity of optimization. All right. So as a result of that, people have seen that RISC machines generally run faster. I will come to that part little later. Okay, but we cannot always say that my RISC machines are have higher performance than CISC machines. So it totally depends on the context and the design and a lot of other things, right? So complex instruction set, as we have said, that seen that they could be of variable length, and so this may cause non-uniform decode. That the opcode that is to be decoded will be complex, right? And it has many addressing modes. All right. So, and say for example, VAX computer that came in the beginning had FFT, quick sort, polynomial computation, floating point instructions, index instructions. There are a lot of complex data types were there, and that causes hardware to be slower. Okay. However, there are less number of instructions per program. That's a possibly advantage. Okay. Any question on this one? Are you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, please feel free to ask any question, because in your interviews, if there is a company coming from say ARM or maybe some other Intel or something, they may ask some questions of RISC versus CISC, and you have to intelligently answer this back, because ARM is based on RISC, and they have taken all the market from Intel for mobile handset, whereas Intel has CISC. Okay, so they still claim that CISC is good. So if they ask you a question, then you don't have to criticize CISC and say that Intel is useless processor. You don't have to. Okay, so this is very interesting, because this debate still goes on, and Intel is still very powerful player in the whole game. And the reason why they have kept the instruction set CISC is something because of legacy reasons, because they started with 8086 and they have to support those instruction set. However, in between architecture change, microarchitecture change significantly, so they have to add number of instructions to properly utilize the available technology, and then this has all led into complex instruction set architecture. Okay, so however, there is still a lot of debate happening around this area, but in general, companies are moving towards RISC because it's simple to design, simple to compilers are simple, and so on, right? And latest example of that is that Apple, Apple laptops, if the one that I have, or iPad, all these had Intel processor chips till very recently, and now Apple has designed their own processor which is based on RISC technology. Okay, so however, we still cannot say that war is over, and it goes on. So, but this, if you understand this CISC concepts well, possibly you can score a point in your interviews if the question is asked. Okay, the history is as follows. CISC processor came first with the Intel and so on, right? Because assembly language, people used to do programming in assembly language, and assembly language was kept very close to high level language, right? So programmers generally do think in terms of high level language or abstract instructions. So in order to ease the life of programmer, the instruction set was designed to be complex. Okay, this processor came in mid 80s, say around 83, 84, and so on. And the original reason for CISC, as we discussed earlier, memory was small and expensive, and programmer were working in assembly. These were two important things. And then high level language came, like initially there was Fortran, COBOL, and then came Pascal, Algol, then was C, and then C++, and then there are a lot of programming language like Python, and then some special programming languages are also available now for doing some activities, right? Okay. Now once it came, right, then programmers started using high level language, and then compilers also became smarter in optimization and so on, right? So then that was the reason the RISC became more popular. All right. Major CISC constraints are higher chip area, complex processor design, right? So these are the two difficult things which we have discussed already. Uh, so arguments for in favor of RISC are as following: shorter design time, because everything is simple; better use of chip space. Okay, because you don't have to create you don't have to waste chip space to do complex instructions if they are rarely used. Okay, greater speed. Now this point we'll see what is speed in general of a processor and how can they achieve greater speed. Okay, is just clock is the speed or something like that? We'll see. And the important thing, assembly need not match with high level language. They say that has a great advantage. Otherwise, high level language should look like assembly in some sense. Now there is total decoupling. I mean, your high level language could be C, C++, or as well as Python, or even some Modular or some very special high level language, but assembly language instruction could be very simple. Okay, so these are the main arguments in favor of RISC. However, despite all these disadvantages, CISC remained dominant due to legacy reason. Like, Intel has been dominant and they have been improving their technology continuously. Processor speed was going up. So people never felt the need for moving to RISC architecture in server domain and also PC domain. Okay. However, it's also like this, that people realize that CISC is good architecture, but there has to be industry support, right? Nobody wants to try something very new until the whole technology area is becoming like when mobile came, they had a possibility of choosing RISC for certain reasons. Okay. However, in last 2 decades, RISC grew very fast. Okay. Note that whatever Intel has proposed, ISA and implementation is not open source. ISA, of course, is visible to programmers because without that, nobody will buy Intel. But what goes inside is not visible, right? So there's the first time that open sourcing of ISA and microarchitecture is happening in case of RISC-V that we'll study. And of course, of late, the whole market space changed because smartphones. So today, number of smartphones are many, many times higher than number of PCs. Okay. And that requires a lot of energy and power constraints, right? Or instructions that can manage this. Because, because processors are to be designed in such a way that energy consumption is minimum. So for example, most of mobiles have quad core processors and and these operate at multiple speeds, right? So in the night when nothing is happening excepting for, it's just receiving few signals and doing some basic things, most of the processors are off. Only one processor is running at very slow speed. That's good enough to do that task, right? Now, since number of processor and parts of phone are off, then power consumption is less. All right. So for those kind of application, RISC was considered to be better technology. Okay. All right. So now onwards, now we have some idea about RISC and CISC. Let's spend some time on designing data path. Look at what are the different ways of designing data path. And then next lecture onwards, we will start discussion on RISC for RISC-V architecture. Okay. Any question up to this point? Okay. So what we have discussed is essentially RISC. What is this technology and what is CISC technology? what are the advantages and disadvantages, right? Okay, in what condition risk is useful and for what kind of applications risk is useful. This is what we have studied. Please keep this in mind and repeat from internet sources. I mean, you can read some articles, because this is one of the very important questions that you will face all throughout, not only now, but also in career, you know, there will be debates. Okay? And if you join any silicon company, then of course, this is an important part. All right. So next is data path and control logic. And we have seen what data path is. It is nothing but hardware elements that deals with manipulation or transformation of data. Okay. Remember that computer does only one thing. It has input data and it transforms into output data that's in some useful shape, or that can be used. Okay. So computer is nothing but something that transforms data, and the path that data takes, starting from memory to going up back to memory or output devices, is called data path. Okay. So it essentially consists of all functional units that operate on data. So hardware structures like, you know, wires, muxes, ALU, and so on, registers, where data actually goes through or where data is manipulated. Okay. All right. And then of course we have seen data path is controlled by control logic, which generates control signals. Like in case of LC3, we have seen how control signals are generated, and then they control movement of data or manipulation of data. Okay. Now this design that we can do, and in fact in the course we'll do single cycle design. Okay, can be done in single cycle. It means that one instruction can be completed in single cycle. When we say cycle, is nothing but clock cycle. So if we have clock cycle which looks like this, so this is where, you know, rising edge is something that work will start, and up to this point work should end. Okay, so within one cycle the instruction execution has to be over. Okay, so what is the constraint of this? If the instruction is complex, is doing a lot of things, this cycle time has to be more. Instead of this, we will have to have this kind of cycle. Okay, so cycle time is limited by longest instruction. The other design is that instead of you try to do everything in single cycle, you let your instruction take multiple cycles. Okay, now cycle here, for example, you see single cycle, and this is some computation that's shown in orange, this here. So it's taking just one cycle. So it means that cycle size, cycle time remains same, right? So it's like this. This is one cycle time. This is second cycle time. This third cycle time. Now, wherein here in the multi-cycle case, this is first cycle time, this second cycle time, third cycle time, fourth cycle, fifth. So this task that we are doing a single cycle can be done in multiple cycles. Okay, so some instruction may take 5 cycles, other instruction may take 1 or 2 cycles. Now in this case, let's assume there is a simple instruction here that takes very small time. Then remaining time here is unused. Okay, so it means next instruction has to wait for some time to execute. Wherein in multi-cycle time, we can optimize this, okay? All right, okay. All right. So there are a number of ways we can design data path and control. Okay, for example, single cycle, multi-cycle we have seen. Then we can have within cycle pipeline data path. We'll see, I mean, concept of pipeline we have studied in brief, but we'll see how pipeline can be designed. And we have also seen what is the role of bus, right? Bus interconnect different parts of computer. Okay. Now we can have one single bus that can be shared across number of units, say between CPU, memory, cache, IO units, and so on. Or there can be multi-buses. Okay, more than one buses are there. Say there can be a bus between CPU and say main memory. And there is another bus that will connect this bus but it will not disturb the operation of main bus until unless there is IO, right? So there can be 2 buses or 3 buses, and then can be used intelligently. Okay, we'll look at that. Then we can generate control signals using hardwire. There's combination logic circuit. Okay, we have seen certain, is actually, if you look at the output of FSM, it has certain inputs, which is nothing but control instruction, instruction or opcode, mainly opcode. And it has certain number of outputs, right, which are enabled in each cycle. Okay, now this generation of this signal can be done in using combination logic circuit, right? A different kind of gates, or it can be done using the ROM, right? Our microprogram is a micro-coded microprogram. It means that for if op is this one, then you go to inside a ROM and it will look at what instructions to be generated or what signals will be generated, and those signals will be generated. All right, so there are 2 types. It's either using a combination logic circuit or microprogrammed. Okay, so we'll see that. Okay, so control signal, of course, this part we have already done. So that's largely about something that we have discussed, how data path, what ways data path can be designed. And this course we are going to look at single cycle data path first, and also we'll look at pipeline data path, and time permits we'll go into multi-cycle design. All right, and we'll do design for RISC-V. This is very new, but I think enough things are available, so I will have to dig into those papers. All right, now let's look at, now when we have to compare CISC versus RISC, or compare 2 computers, we'll have to define what is a performance. Okay, and once we define performance, we can say that my laptop is faster than your laptop. Okay, and it's very complex thing, because see, if you go to Intel side, they will say their technology is best. If you go to ARM side, they will say their technology is best. So everyone says that my technology is good, and they will try to show that the performance of their computer is better than that of others. Okay, if that is so, then there has to be something that has to define performance. And this debate happened till early 90s, that what is better and what is not, because nobody had defined performance of computer till that point. Okay, and then of course this Berkeley group and Stanford group along with industry came out with benchmark programs. Okay, we'll look at benchmark programs in one of the lab class, because it will take about 1 hour or 40 to 50 minutes to explain. Okay, and once benchmark program is there, okay, then if you run benchmark program and see the time your computer takes and compare it with other computers, then one can say for this benchmark program, and this benchmark program represents actually some set of computations. Okay, then one can say that say computer A is faster than computer B. Okay, so we'll look at that later, but let's look at what constitutes performance of a computer, right? And this is very simple thing, and this was brought into consideration only around mid 90s by Peterson and Hennessy, when they saw that there's a huge debate and nobody knows how to calculate performance. See, can you say, for example, I have a computer that has a clock speed of say 5 gigahertz, and there's another computer that has a clock speed of 1 gigahertz. So my computer, which has 5 gigahertz speed, is better than 1 gigahertz computer. Can we say that? Well, that's a question to you. So that's how we actually buy when we buy processors or Intel, where if you assemble your PC, which nowadays nobody does, but we have done it. I mean, people of my age, I was saving 5,000 rupees, and computers were very expensive. Then we'll realize that the higher clock speed of Intel is better than slower clock speed. Okay. In general, we look at some of these aspects, right? But see, coming back to the same question, 5 gigahertz versus 1 gigahertz, we can of course say that 5 gigahertz is better, but we'll have to see, is it the same make, is running the same program, or ISA is the same, and ISA implementation could be different. Okay, is it going to take same number of cycles to execute one instruction? Only then we can say that if all these conditions are satisfied, then we can say something that's running at 5 times faster in terms of clock speed is better than one that's running at 1 gigahertz. All right. Okay. Performance of program. Now this slide is about very general topics, and we have already discussed this. We know that there is slowing down of Moore's law. We know power wall constraint. And so we can expect today only 20% of annual improvement if you just go by technology improvement. Okay, not 50 or 60% like it used to happen earlier. Okay, so now largely in order to achieve more performance, you have to do multi-threading programming. Okay, and there are of course overhead of synchronization, communication. Yeah. All right. And then we have to use memory hierarchy, and we have to use accelerators. All these points we have discussed in the past. So in a uniprocessor, or sorry, in a processor with multiple cores, if you buy a processor tomorrow or laptop tomorrow, you may not get much advantage because Moore's law is slowing down. Okay, number of transistors that will go into chip will continue to improve, but the rate at which it was improving is not happening anymore. So in order to achieve higher performance, you have to do smart things, like you have to do multiple cores. You have to utilize multiple cores for the program. Okay, we are talking here about the program, right? So if you want to increase the performance of program, you have to do multi-threading programming, and then thread have to be properly scheduled on different processors. See, in general, people have seen if multi-threading program not properly scheduled and run, or not designed properly, can take more than single thread program. Okay, this happens very often in industry, and then people realize that there is some basic mistake they have done in programming. Memory hierarchy we have seen, and this matrix copying program that we have done demonstrate that memory hierarchy is really important. And then we have seen in case of GPU, which is nothing but accelerator, are being used nowadays. So defining performance of computer can be very tricky, very, very tricky, right? Because you'll have to, you cannot just say one computer is performing better than other. You have to ask questions, lot of questions you'll have to ask, I mean, is it the same program that's running? Is the computer designed for a specific purpose? Suppose you have GPU and you're not using GPU, then there won't be a proper performance improvement. Okay. Similarly, there can be lot of ways in which we can measure the performance. Okay. Let's take up one example. So you're familiar with all this, right? What is this one, the first one? What is this car?
Nano.
Tata Nano.
Yes. Tata Nano. And second one? Here?
Ferrari.
Ferrari, right? And this is what we see every day, auto rickshaw.
Rickshaw.
This is bus. This is, not many of you would have seen this, called Tempo. This runs in, say, Madhya Pradesh and maybe some places in UP. Possibly cheapest, but for some reason is being, and this is what a tempo traveler or something like this. Can you say whose performance is highest or best? It totally depends, how do you calculate performance, right? We Indians think always, I mean, of course, we thinking is changing, but we always think in terms of mileage, right? Now, mileage is a word that's used only in India. So we say in Hindi, kitna deti hai, right? How many kilometers the car gives. Okay, so fuel efficiency is a measure of performance. But if you ask Michael Schumacher or somebody, Hamilton, what is performance of a car, then he will say that can zoom, say, 100 miles in within, say, 2 seconds or 3 seconds or 4 seconds, something like that, right? So acceleration and all other factors are important here, which constitute performance. If you ask a auto rickshaw driver, his level of performance, his definition of performance is very different. And maybe bus driver will say something different and so on, right? So we'll have to then see what is really a performance. Is it the speed, or is it capacity, or bandwidth? The total capacity per unit dollar, per 100 rupees, let's assume. Okay, or you can say bandwidth or kilometers into number of people or passengers per rupees 100. We can define the way you want to define a performance, and then you can see each one will fit, each one will give different higher level of performance for that measurement parameter, right? For example, cheapest personal car, which will require least amount of money and has a fuel efficiency, could be this one. And fuel efficiency for Ferrari will be very, very bad. Okay, let's move on. So for individual computers, the response time is important. Okay, so if I'm a computer user, then if I'm running an application and it's taking a lot of time, then it's not good. So for me, response time is important, right? My response time is generally between start and completion of a task. Okay. However, see, as a user of say Google, right? Response time is important for you, because you may want your query, which you simply search your name, it will fork into 50,000 different queries inside data center, and results is collected. Okay, and then is presented to you. It has to happen within few seconds. So response time is important to users. While data center manager, response time of course is important, but not for individual users. They will try to increase the throughput or bandwidth or number of tasks that are going to be completed, number of queries that are to be completed. So that could be another parameter for them, right? Okay, all right. So of course we will answer some of the questions, like if you replace a processor with faster version, what will be impact on time and throughput, etc. We'll do this later. So let's spend some more time. So response time is nothing but elapsed time, right? Is essentially includes computing time plus IO time plus some other things which we don't know. Okay, maybe OS or something. So essentially it's a time you give a trigger, which your program starts running, and time you get the response. So that's called response time or latency or elapsed time. Okay. Throughput is that how many jobs are to be completed. So this is from perspective. If they're multi-user machine, then OS may not want to increase the performance for one user, but overall it will try to complete maximum number of jobs. Okay. So for example, you're in a canteen and you have ordered samosa, then you are waiting for samosa to come. Okay, that's your concern that should come in 5 minutes, my class starting and so on, right? So you want minimum time. So response time is important for you. But the one who is making samosa, right, for him, the important is that how many customers are satisfied. So maybe he's preparing 50 samosas at a time and so on and so forth, right? So for them, it's a bandwidth that's important. All right, or throughput is important. Uh, so so overall response time contains CPU time plus IO wait time, right? So when we say CPU time is essentially time actually CPU takes for the computation. So there can be CPU time, then IO time or wait time. So this is CPU time, wait time, then CPU time and wait time and so on, right? So CPU time is summation of all this. All right. So let's consider only execution time, okay, which is CPU time. I will not bother about IO because then we'll have to look at what kind of IO, what is the bus speed and so on. So today in this class, we'll focus largely about execution time, okay? Okay, now let's define relative performance of two machines. So there's a machine X and machine Y, and they are running the same program. So some programs is there that's being run in two computers. So we can say that one which takes less amount of time is better, right? Because its response time is better. So we can say performance of X is 1 by execution time. Okay, if the execution time is high, that performance is low. For the same program when run on machine Y, then we can say performance is 1 by execution time of Y. Okay, so we can calculate the relative performance, that performance of X divided by performance Y, then it becomes execution time of Y divided by execution time of X. All right. Okay. So now let's take one example. Let's consider one program and it takes 10 seconds on A and 15 seconds on B. So then we can say that, of course, machine A is faster than B because taking less time. But how much faster? You look at execution time of B divided by execution time of A, and you will find that 1.5. So we can say is that it's 1.5 times faster than B. So A is faster by 1.5 times. All right, very simple. Any question?
No, sir.
This is common sense, right? Okay. The one way of defining performance is that how many instructions are being executed in a second. Now, all right, so that's called MIPS. Millions of instructions executed per second. And this happens only at the microprocessor level or ISA level. So these instructions are nothing but machine instructions or assembly level instructions, machine instructions. Now, if you look at performance application level, then you can say how many queries have been answered per day and then so on. Okay, and then if you go at lower level, then you have number of cycles per second, and data path you can look at in terms of bandwidth. Okay, so but we cannot say still that machine that has higher MIPS is faster than others, and people have played this trick for very long, right? So machine that has a higher MIPS, then we'll have to see what kind of instructions they are executing. Are the instructions same as that in earlier machine? How many cycles they are taking? Okay, and is the instruction doing exactly the same thing? Okay, if the ISS is same for two machines and doing exactly the same thing, okay, then we can say that multiple instructions per second, the one that is higher is faster, otherwise not. Okay, this part you would have already studied in logic design course. Something that is necessary for processor to execute is clock. Okay, because clock defines what can be done. For example, if this is a clock period, so data transfer can start only when at the leading edge. Okay, and at this point in time, most of combinational logic will there'll be some delays, etc., etc. You would have studied all this, right? So it will happen only within a clock cycle, right? So this is the time in which data transfer and computation happens, and the state change happens at the end of the clock cycle. We will have seen that, right? Okay, now let's come to this one. Okay. All right, so there is some signs are missing here. So CPU time for a program. Okay, there is a program that you have written. How much time it takes? Okay, so CPU takes, the program takes certain number of cycles, clock cycles, right? So let's take, so CPU time is equal to CPU, number of CPU's clock cycles. This is nothing but number of CPU clock cycle into cycle time. Okay, and then we can define this as CPU clock cycle divided by clock rate. The cycle time is nothing but 1 divided by clock rate. When we say it's a 5 megahertz or 5 gigahertz clock, okay, it means that so many 5 gigahertz cycles per second, then one cycle will take 1 by 5 gigahertz time. Okay, you can calculate. So this is nothing but clock cycle time is nothing but 1 divided by clock rate. Now, how can you increase the speed of a program? Okay, then you can say that if my program takes less number of clock cycles. But how will it take less number of clock cycles? You design the program in such a way that it, instructions, there's no redundant instruction, and you do intelligent things, programming, and then you say that in general, my program takes less number of cycles. Okay. Or you can increase, if the same number of instructions are being executed, you can increase the clock rate. Okay. It means that when you increase the clock rate, then you reduce the cycle time, so overall CPU time is reduced. Okay. Okay, and then how we design must trade off clock rate against cycle count. Okay, we'll discuss this later. Okay, if you increase the clock rate, okay, it means the cycle time clock. If you increase, let's assume this is in the beginning. If you increase the clock rate, then of course this will become smaller. Now, question is that in this time, can you execute an instruction? You may want to continuously increase the clock rate, instruction execution may take more and more time, or more and more number of cycles, right? So these are all interlinked. So we cannot say that by increasing clock speed, CPU time will reduce. We'll have to see a lot of other factors. Any question?
Sir, I have a little confusion.
Yes.
Why do we call response time same as elapsed time? I mean, response time we are defining as the time by which we start getting responses.
Yes.
And elapsed time should be, sir, anything that should be some monitoring criteria only, I guess.
It's exactly because elapsed time for a user, elapsed time is when the response becomes available. Total time that's elapsed since I have given input. I am receiving it. So you do Google query. The instant you do Google query, of course, there will be some communication time. Okay, then once it's received by Google data center, and then it will do computation. So it doesn't matter to you because all these are invisible to you. So you look at response time same as elapsed time. Okay, it's a different name. There's no difference.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, fine, sir.
Different name. All right. So, okay, let's move ahead. Let's take one example. Okay. So we have computer A that's running at 2 gigahertz and takes 10 seconds as CPU time. Okay. And then we are designing a computer B, and our requirement is that we should complete this instead of 10 seconds, should complete in 6 seconds. So, and in order to do that, we increase the clock cycle. Okay, clock rate. And however, the number of cycles and the program takes is 1.2 times the clock cycles. Then how So basically now we want to find out what should be the clock rate. Okay. So we can say clock rate B is equal to this, equal to this. So basically CPU time, if you look at it this way, CPU time for B, because we're running the same program, CPU time for B is equal to CPU time for B is equal to number of clock cycles into cycle time, right? Cycle time is nothing but 1 by clock rate, right? So you replace this by 1 by clock rate, then clock rate comes here, you bring it to left hand side, then it becomes number of clocks. So this is nothing but number of clock cycle divided by CPU time. Okay, so and this CPU time for B is now number of clock cycles is 1.2 times clock cycles for A, and the overall time that you have is now 6 seconds. So from this you can now in this one you substitute clock cycles for A, which is nothing but CPU time into clock rate, and if you substitute this, then you get, so this is the same net. Then you substitute this value into here, then you will get the resultant equal to 4 gigahertz. Okay, this is a very simple calculation. You can go through it again. Okay, so what I want to just emphasize here is that, so now we have increased the clock speed from 2 gigahertz to 4 gigahertz, but number of cycles, okay, and in order to, when you double the speed of clock, the time is not reducing by half. The time is reducing from 10 seconds to 6 seconds, because the number of clock cycles that are being taken to execute same number of instructions is 1.2 times, and hence this calculation. Okay, any question on this one? Okay. All right. Okay, so please go through it again. So this should be equivalent. So 10 into 2. So that's okay. This is fine. This is fine. Okay. This is into 10 as well. This is fine. All right. So any question on this one? Okay, so what I'm trying to say is that by increasing the clock speed to 2 times does not mean the time will become half, because in lesser clock time, okay, because clock speed is doubling, so clock period will reduce to half. It's not possible always to do the complete work. Okay, so now the instruction may take more number of cycles to complete. All right. Okay. Okay, here is the next one. Again, there's some problem in PPT, so I will fill this up. Number of clock cycle equal to number of instruction counts and cycles per instruction. Now, here there is a concept of number of cycles per instruction. Okay, can we say that all instructions have same cycle? No, unless it's a single cycle design. In general, number of cycles in an instruction for different instructions will change. For example, for load and store instructions, number of cycles are more than simple addition instruction, right? So in general, for a program, number of clock cycles the program will take is nothing but number of instructions it has and number of instructions that let's assume is 100, then number of cycles per instruction is, let's assume, 2. Now this is average number of cycles. Otherwise you'll have to look at each instruction and number of cycle it takes and do summation. That's also one way, right? But we are coming up with a term called cycle per instruction, which is average cycles per instruction. Okay, so CPU time is equal to instruction count into cycles per instruction into cycle time, clock cycle time. Okay, all right, which is nothing but instruction count into CPI divided by clock rate. Okay, so CPU time or execution time for a program depends on number of instructions it has, then cycles per instruction divided by what speed the clock has, or cycle time, or into cycle time we can say. Okay, now how do we optimize on this one? Now you want to reduce this CPU time, you want to reduce. How can you reduce now CPU time? By playing with these factors. Either increase the clock rate from, let's say we have seen 5 gigahertz to say, let's assume 10 gigahertz. This is just an example, it may not be true always. Okay, then by doing so, we can see the cycles per instruction may increase, right? Okay, second way of doing it is that reduce the number of instructions. Okay, and third way is that can we reduce number of cycles per instruction? Okay, so all these things there is an interplay. Okay, so if we touch one, other may change. So in this, using this formula, which was given by Hennessy and Peterson, we can in general calculate the CPU time. Now you can put in here, you are doing it for CISC versus RISC and what is impact. Okay, I would like you to go through the example that's given. I will resend the PPT. Something happened. Anyway, please look at this example by yourself. It's given in the book. It's just copied from the book by Peterson and Hennessy, and please go through it. Huh? And then in general, we can say, okay, CPU time for a program, again, this is for a program, right? Is number of instructions in the program, okay, and number of cycles per instruction, because this is number of instructions, and then you'll have to multiply by how many cycles each instruction is taking, okay, into what is cycle time, okay, number of cycles into cycle time. So this gives overall CPU time. Now, the question is that what is algorithm is impacting what? If you write algorithm, then is then changing the number of instructions. That's, we call it instruction count. You can write algorithm which will take more instruction count. Okay. Programming languages will impact what? Yes, again, instruction count and cycles per instruction. Compiler will also impact instruction count and cycle per instruction. Or instructions and architecture will impact instruction count, cycle per instruction, clock rate. Okay. Now, when you have these values available for different processors for a given program, then you can say that my program runs faster than the other. All right. So this formula came out in late 90s by Hennessy and Peterson, and then debate moved in favor of RISC, because they told very clearly that it's not that number of cycles that you can count, but you'll have to also see number of instructions that are being executed and what each instruction is doing. How much each instruction, how many cycles each instruction. So in case of CISC, for example, number of instruction could be very less. So we can't say it's faster. Then we'll have to see how many cycles per instruction is taking. And then we'll have to see cycle time. Okay, when you have all these three information available, only then you can say that CPU time for a processor is better than others. All right, thank you. So this is all for today.